Good afternoon. You know what time it is. Welcome to the Chicken Box. I'm Kevin Impeccable Peck, your host, along with Dr. Draper and Misha Green, which I will get to. How are you guys today?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. You know what I mean? I hear chicken and I get hungry. It's crazy. If you're from Baltimore and you've ever heard of a chicken box, you know what that is. That's four wings and fries. But the name of this show is the Chicken Box, where we say don't be a chicken. Get on the box and speak your truth. Whatever it is, your opinion, how you're feeling, what some things just prick you. Like if you run into one of your friends that you know your friends and they say I'm voting for Trump. It just does something to you. I don't know why it should do something to you emotionally like that, but it just does, and it just sets you off. And sometimes you're on the wrong path. But the chicken box helps break stereotypes. It helps break down important things that are that you might not know about the black community, but you just kind of go with it. And sometimes you go with it even though it's wrong. But maybe it's not wrong to you. Maybe it's just wrong to everybody else. But you ever think somebody who's just they swear they're speaking the truth, but to everybody else who's listening in the room, it sounds crazy. We have a great show today. It is Black People versus Blue Lives. We have heard so much over the past about blue lives and black lives and what matters and what should matter, and all lives matter, but these lives seem to be getting killed. And what is going on in the community, in the world today? What lives matter to you? Do all lives matter to you? Have you just stood on one side? Are you only on the blue side? Are you only on the black side? And is there black on the blue? You know what I mean? So it's black and blue, and lives do matter. It's a great show. Again, my favorite millennial friend, Misha Green. How are you again? I didn't really get a chance to check in on you.
I am doing well. Thank you so much for asking. I'm over here doing what I do, which is sharing the stream and, making sure that all of our personal worlds know exactly what's going on and know that we're having this really important conversation. So I encourage everyone who's tuning in to do the same, and thank you for watching.
Right. You know what? I forgot. If we popped up on your thread, that means you're watching through the Afro American Newspapers channel, Facebook page, or network, like we like to say. So sometimes the information you think is just for you, but sometimes it's for your friends, it's for the community. So hit the share button, which is a little arrow. If you're not really Facebook suave, you can just hit the little arrow out there and share it with a group that you manage, own, or your own personal Facebook page. Dr. Draper.
Yes, I'm sharing. I'm
I
sharing.
see
I'm
you. I see
sharing
you.
on
Look at you.
my,
Look
sharing on
at
my
you.
Facebook page. Listen. We have to talk about those stereotypes too. All baby boomers are not technology illiterate.
Yes.
Let me just put that out there, okay? So in fact, we resent the implication that we are because we're the ones that created the technology. The rest of y'all came behind us and perfected it. But anyway, I'm Francis Tony Draper, privileged to serve as the publisher of the 128-year-old Afro-American. Welcome to the Chicken Box. I'm really excited about today's topic, so I hope you'll do like I'm doing. Like, and if you haven't already, share this broadcast to your friends, with your friends rather, so we can all be a part of it as we get on the box.
Black people versus blue lives. That is our topic today. Good afternoon, everybody who's tuning in. We see Laura chiming in, Patrick, Byron Dees, of course, Angelique. I may be saying your name wrong, but look, we're gonna need you to jump into the comments today and stay in the conversation. Always grab your lunch. If you're on the East Coast, grab your breakfast on the West, and if you are overseas, grab your dinner. Okay. So look, while the world is just getting woke, should we say, to Black Lives Matter, the major challenge with Black lives and police officers still exists, as seen in George Floyd case, Breonna Taylor, and nameless others. I could go through the names, and I probably would. The whole show would be the names, and it strikes a chord. You know what I mean? And there's been a lot of things happening without it seeming like the justice for a lot of these unfortunate crimes, which we call them, but for some reason it doesn't seem like a crime when it happens because of of what the outcome is. Uh, that's crazy. I got stumped for a minute because I just got to thinking about people's lives.
Well, Kevin, while you're thinking about people's lives, I mean, even most recently, Jonathan Price, the 31-year-old trainer who was a Blue Lives Matter advocate, who was murdered. Just call it what it was, murdered in Texas for stopping a domestic violence, and so he was breaking up an altercation. He was walking away, and so these things do happen far too often.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is the Black people versus blue lives. And we know all cops aren't bad. And we know all white cops aren't racist. And when we say Black Lives Matter, it's not to say that blue lives don't. So we're going to break it down. We have a special friend of the Afro who's coming on today to help us break it down. I would like to introduce, and I just met this guy. He's got a very warm spirit. His name is Steve Ward, former Lieutenant Colonel for the Baltimore City Police Department. Everybody, welcome, Steve. Hey, Steve, how are you today, man?
Fine. I'm really glad to be on this show today. The conversation, it needs to be had. I just really am very privileged for you guys to invite me on your show today that I could participate.
Absolutely, because you bring a lot of experience. 19 years and 7 months is what I think you told me that you spent on the Baltimore City Police Department, which is a feat. You're still alive. You've still managed to come home to your family, and you're still pushing forward. I heard in the DC area now, still doing working in the security business. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
So, Steve, welcome to the Chicken Box. It is Black people versus blue lives, and we're gonna get down to the nitty gritty. I know we all have something to say about the Black people and relationship with the police. So let's all hop on the box. This is called the Chicken Box, and let's just start the conversation. Dr. Draper.
Yeah, let me start by saying, personally, I respect blue lives. Thank you, Steve, for your service to Baltimore City Police Department, and as well as your service to our country in Afghanistan and other places, and for being on Chicken Box on today. And so I have a lot of good friends that work for the police department here in Baltimore, a lot of respect for what they do in the community. So policing, the way we think about policing is certainly one aspect of it, but then there's this community policing aspect. And so a lot of cops in Baltimore, work well with the community. Are there bad cops? There are bad cops every place, right? But there are far more good cops than there are bad cops. So I'm gonna get on the box to say that blue lives matter. The police do a service for our young people as well as our not so young people. I don't know if they still, like the fire department, get cats out of trees, but we have partnered with the police department for community festivals and other things. And so I'm glad to have Steve on, and so I'm off the box.
If you just tuned in, this is the Chicken Box. It is Black people versus blue lives. And for a while, it appears that sometimes it's just like what I said earlier. If you are on another side of the coin, all of a sudden everybody's bad. Like if you're a Christian and you say you're voting for Trump, do I hate you all of a sudden now? You know what I mean? And if you're in the police department and another member of that fraternal organization is a bad person or has done something really heinous, do I hate all police officers now? I'm just throwing that out there for the chat. Like how do you guys feel out there? Misha, my millennial friend, I love saying it. What is your generation? I mean, what are you personally experiencing? Because you've been out on the streets and the peaceful protests that somehow always get to be turned as if it's not peaceful. And the intent is not for everybody who's out there to not be peaceful.
Yeah, no. So I think overall, I'll first start with myself. Personally, I do understand that blue lives are important. But the reason why I get offended by the comment blue lives matter is because we know that's the case, just like we know all lives matter. But right now, Black lives are who's at stake right now, and have been not just right now, but for centuries. And it seems that despite progress, there has still not been made a case where Black Lives Matter enough, where we're not being gunned down by law enforcement and those who consider themselves self-appointed law officers. That said, I absolutely know that there are wonderful cops, and I know many police who are doing great work and really ensuring that not only our communities are safe, but becoming a member of the community, which I think is key. Part of the problem is that you have these officers who don't know about their communities, who don't know how to work with others in the community. And so that's when something that may seem like it's turning into abrasive conversation. We know that's how Black folks sometimes come off, right? Or when things come off in a way that seems threatening. There are officers who know how to work or de-escalate. And I think that's a major part of the problem right now is that many of our officers are not trained accordingly, do not know how to de-escalate, and are not particularly trained in mental health areas. And so when I've been out on these streets where the violence comes, where the escalation comes, as I've been covering these protests, is that there are people already are anxious around officers. They're protesting because of officers shooting Black lives. And so as soon as something sort of happens, to me the motion of an officer that seems at all aggressive or is aggressive escalates into something bigger. It turns into people getting jumped. It turns into a larger thing. And part of that is because there's already a rub. There's already a level of disconnect between Black people and blue lives right now. And so it escalates in such a way that is not effective, is not conducive, and people are unnecessarily getting arrested and or killed.
Absolutely. If you just tuned in, this is the Chicken Box, and we're having a conversation about Black people versus blue lives. We have Steve Ward, former Lieutenant Colonel from the Baltimore City Police Department for 19 years. And Steve, why don't you just kind of take us through your journey as when you first stepped on the beat? What was your intention when you initially came into the police department?
Yeah, just like a lot of young cops when they first start, you really want to really help the community. That's the number one thing, that you're there to help people, to assist people. One thing that I think that the police department, when I first came on with Baltimore City, they didn't really go into the community part at all. I really didn't understand the interaction with the community and the importance of the community probably until 6 or 7 years after I joined the department. So I know Ms. Green said something very important. She said training. That is very true. One thing that we have in Baltimore City that I always heard, we want our officers to live in our communities. The one thing about it is we don't have a lot of people that apply to become a police officer in Baltimore City. We have to, as an agency, we had to go outside to Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico. And, a lot of them guys, they have the same thing. They want to be a good cop. They want to help people that are in need. But the thing about it is they're missing something key. The training part as far as the community that they're serving. One thing great about Baltimore, they call it Smallmore, but we all know it got over 100 some communities. Every community is unique in its own. And so we never really trained our cops to understand the importance of the community and the history of the community until probably around the Freddie Gray incident. When the Freddie Gray civil unrest happened, that's when the Baltimore City Police Department finally started changing in my career. and that's 15 years already into my career. But goes back to something that's very important, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but we got to have these hard conversations. Black lives matter, yeah. If black lives don't matter, nothing else matters. And if you're not, we're in 2020 now. We got to have these discussions. If you have an issue over someone's skin color, we got to have a conversation about it, because guess what? We're all brothers and sisters. I don't care if you're white, black, Hispanic, we all bleed red. It doesn't matter. And we have to have them hard conversations where we got to know history of racism. We got to understand why we are where we right now with the Breonna Taylors, the George Floyds, where we are right now as far as the history. Is there racism in the criminal justice system? Yeah. Perfect example. Let's look at the college scandal. A lot of them are higher class Caucasians. Look at the criminals. Look at the time they're getting compared to somebody of color, Hispanic, African American, that are getting their sentences are ridiculous compared to what white people are getting. And that's a serious conversation we have to have in America. But it going back. Let me get off my soapbox. I apologize.
That's a chicken box, sir.
Yeah, I apologize, sir. But get back.
No, this is where you come and this is where you speak your truth.
Yeah.
This is the truth that you believe, and the difference is that everybody's truth is different.
Mm-hmm. And believe me, I love police. In Baltimore, they're great cops there. Officers are there. The thing about it is, going back to what Miss Green said something earlier, this is one of the big things. This is where leadership comes in. If you're in a leadership position in the police department and you're getting information that cops are stealing, robbing drug dealers, cops are roughing up the community, and you as a leader don't do nothing about it, then guess what happens? 10 years down the road, you have GTTF happens, and that explodes in your face, and then you have no trust at all with the police department. So that goes back to the training, knowing your community, knowing that you got to know how to communicate. Guess what? You can't come up in somebody's face and sit down on the ground because I told you so. That ain't how you communicate. Guess what? I always told the cops underneath me, you always talk to people the way you would talk to your mother or your father. No matter what, you always be respectful. I don't care how high I get. And then I always used to tell officers that work with other officers, if you see someone getting very agitated or whatever, step in between, de-escalate it. That de-escalation, that's not just a word in law enforcement. De-escalation communications are the two big things in law enforcement, I believe, in today, other than mental health, that really prevent a lot of these incidents. If we had them preventions, George Floyd, if one of them officers stepped up to that officer that had his knee in the back of Mr. Floyd's neck, that incident wouldn't happen. If he had stepped up and say, hey, get off, push him off. That's de-escalation. That's communication. That could have been prevented, incidents like that. So there's no doubt about it. As a police department nowadays, you got to have the training. You got to make sure the community is a part of whatever training that you decide to have, because what happens in Baltimore is totally different in New York, New Orleans, Chicago. Baltimore is its own entity. It's no doubt about it. Like Chicago, like New York is. So you have to bring the community in. Same thing is you have different things. Communities in South Baltimore is different than North Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore, East Baltimore. So you got to bring the communities in each district and communicate and say, hey, what do you want your officers to be? What do you need from your officers? And the officers got to be involved in that decision making, the community, the churches, the business leaders. And then if we can bring everybody all together as one, you'll see something very special happen in this place.
Absolutely. If you just tuned in, this is the Chicken Box broadcast on the Afro-American newspaper. 128 years of informing, educating, and inspiring, and bringing great conversations to the forefront. We want to have a conversation about it. There's a lot of stereotypes. We touch on stereotypes, and it strikes a lot of chords, but it is a conversation that needs to happen. And when you communicate, you cancel a lot of confusion. And as we said earlier, person on the police force, whether they're black or white, is not bad, but it's the people, like you said, and I think you struck a key point, Steve, when you said it's the leadership. And if the leadership doesn't check certain behaviors throughout the years, then it trickles down to a behavior that is acceptable. Well, okay, well, it was okay when he did it, right? So I guess nothing's going to happen if I do it. And so, everybody's supposed to turn their cameras on, but do they? You know what I mean? How can they turn them off is what I want to say. We need to make a camera that you can't turn off, but you know what I mean? That you can't personally turn off, that it happens at the station, it gets turned on through a code, and then when you get back, it gets turned off. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. We got Denise, Craig Talley, Dolores, Q from Alabama tuning in, and we are having a conversation. Misha Green, there are some stereotypes that we've heard out there, and maybe if you can just tell us what the stereotypes are, and then let's try to deal with them a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I always say, these are just stereotypes, not beliefs of the Afro. And or are we saying that this is factual? These are just, it is a fact that these are stereotypes that exist. And what's interesting is in relation to Black people and police, there are tons of stereotypes that run deep on both sides. Of course, Dr. Draper later will tell you all a little bit further about the history behind some of the rub that is found in the Black community with officers. However, I'm going to just break down the stereotypes in general. And again, these are stereotypes that Black people have, or that police have about Black people, but also that Black people have about cops. So here we go. Black people are guilty before innocent. Police racially profile Black people more often than other races. Black people don't trust the police because of poor experiences in the past. Police officers pick with Black people. Black people must be trained to deal with police. Police protect their own and not the people. Black people are more defensive with officers. And then, of course, there are the different sayings that people have, particularly in urban neighborhoods, have about officers. And this is not just Black people, but such as expletive the police, or expletive 12, or calling police pigs or bacon, or making oink oink noises and things like that. So those are stereotypes on both sides.
That was a long list. Black people versus let's put in the chat if you've heard some other stereotypes out there for those who are engaged in the conversation. And where do these feelings come from, Dr. Draper? Do you think are these stereotypes, or are these emotions based on reality? You're on mute. You're still on mute.
I'm clicking the unmute twice. Right. There you go. There you are. So some of it is stereotypes, but I believe that some of it is based in experience and fact. And so it's not so much that it happens everywhere, but let's be honest about it. The police, and no matter what we've called them, the forces that so-called used to keep people, to keep law and order, have not always been kind to Black people, okay? And so that's why I think there's a lot of rhetoric behind defunding the police, reallocating that money to support communities of color, opportunities to improve the overall public health of neighborhoods. But before defund the police was a hashtag, there have been centuries, there have been decades of strained relationships between the police and Black folk, right? Black people, the slave patrol, right? All the way back to probably the early 1700s in the Carolina counties, you had slave patrols. And then you had a publicly funded police force, was first created back in Boston in the 1800s, and that was supposedly to protect goods. But in the South, the focus was on the preservation of the enslavement of people. That's what the patrols were for. That's what the police were for. And so during the Civil War, the primary group that was empowered, if you will, to enforce were the military in the South. And during Reconstruction, the local sheriffs, some of whom were part of the Ku Klux Klan by night, the police force by day, right? And so they function like slave patrols even there, enforcing segregation, enforcing disenfranchisement. Listen, enforcing voter suppression, which we may still see, not may still see, which we do still see in 2020, using law enforcement in that way. And so to brutalize African Americans during Jim Crow, Rodney King, all of these different incidents. And so it's not all stereotypical. It's not always all stereotypes and myths. Some of this is based in reality. That doesn't mean that all cops are bad, but the acts are so egregious that when it happens, when a George Floyd happens, when a Breonna Taylor happens, when, what happened in Texas with that young man, when that happened, it is so egregious that it just brings up not stereotypes and myths, but the realities of some of the bad and bad policies that are in effect.
Absolutely. This is the Chicken Box. We're talking about Black lives, or Black people versus blue lives, and we understand that lives matter. We have people jumping in and commenting. I'm going to get to that probably question later that Craig Kelly asked about the review boards and the community involvement, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And we understand that you have good and evil, and you got good people and bad people in all walks of life, and some of them put on a uniform, and it makes it, like they said, that the one bad apple spoils the whole bunch, and it casts a shadow of negativity on the whole process, you know what I mean, and on the whole country as far as policing goes. Steve, during these times that we're living in, what have you found that's been the most troubling as a former police officer as we navigate during a time where probably all of these things were happening all along, but we just have technology now that can capture it and get the information out instantaneously? What troubles you the most about everything that's going
on? The distrust in 2020 between community and policing, the racial tension that is still there in 2020. If you asked me this 20 years ago, I would say it would not have been worse. We would have improved. But what Ms. Draper said, she said policies. I think that's one of the biggest things. When we talk about policy, chokeholds, we're talking about the gentleman in Rochester, New York. They put a spit bag over his head. Why are we in 2020? I knew why they put it on his head. I did when I saw it. But wouldn't you think someone would step in and say, you know what? That don't look good. Something can really happen with that right there. We need to come up with another technique and another policy to handle individuals that are spitting at our law enforcement officers. Who in their right mind would think in 2020, putting a bag over somebody's head and just leaving them in the middle of the street? That's policies. That's training. In 2020, I can't believe we're still dealing with that right there. And like what you just said, the key thing now is the cameras. We have to make sure our officers are trained properly. We have to make sure they are following the proper protocols, proper procedures. We have to make sure our checks and balances are in place, because guess what? As you said, they are bad cops. And if officers that are working with these bad cops and supervisors that are supervising these bad cops are not stepping in and making complaint, reporting to them, and making sure they are being fully investigated, then we have a serious issue. And that's where that distrust with the community is still there. And in 2020, we should not have to do that at all. You know, and there's no doubt about it. This is where people say the thin blue line. Officers are not reporting their fellow officers. But what they need to do that because that's where we're still have the issues what we do now in 2020. And I don't care if it's being a police officer. I don't care if it's working for a large major corporation, organization. Everybody has their bad apples. But if you don't fix the bad apples, it gets worse and worse and worse. And as I already said once before, you have a GTTF incident, and that never Baltimore City Police Department is going to be living with that for decades down the road with the distrust with the community. And when you lost the distrust of the community, you lost everything. And it's going to be an uphill battle.
It's some listeners who might not know what the GTTF is. Can you just explain that really quick?
That was a unit in the Baltimore City Police Department, a gun trace task force. Okay. I believe last count 8 are currently serving time for everything from robbing drug dealers to planting evidence on individuals.
Okay. This is the Black People versus Blue Lives. This is the Chicken Box. This is a conversation that sometimes, all of us can be uncomfortable with, but as Steve said, is necessary. One of our listeners said, what is the blue code of silence? Is that something is that what you were kind of referring to, Steve?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Different agencies, when you see an officer doing something, i.e., are they planting drugs on someone, i.e., are they roughing someone up, i.e., they're forging a report. And if you know you're doing it, you're just as wrong as that officer right there because you're not reporting it. And that's just making it worse and worse. And so, yeah, that's the thin blue line where you decide to turn your head the other way, act like it didn't happen or nothing has occurred.
Let me ask a question, Kevin. So how prevalent is that, Steve? How often does that happen, do you think?
I've been out of law enforcement for a couple of years. I can truly say in my 19 years, I never saw anybody plant drugs on anybody. I saw times where maybe there was escalated with some physical force where I had to step in and push an officer away and take over the circumstances. There's been times I made reports to internal affairs from information I've received from the community on certain officers because I felt like I owed that to the community to let the internal affairs fully investigate them. But I did not see it that often with the Baltimore City Police Department at all. And as we've already talked, I think a lot of it nowadays from the body worn cameras, from cell phones, from home cameras. I believe last year in PG County, a shooting was actually caught on tape of a police officer shooting a suspect in PG County last year. And that would not have been caught if the camera from the house itself. And it's totally different what the officer was saying. So I think in smaller agencies, it's probably a little bit more. One thing with sheriff's departments compared, I'm not too sure how many people are aware. Sheriff departments, the difference between sheriff departments and police departments, sheriff departments are elected. And a lot of times in sheriff departments, it's a lot of more friendly. They hook their friends up with different jobs. More than like with local, like Baltimore City Police Department, DC Metro, where you apply for and you go through a process and everything else. It's not as close as like a lot of these smaller sheriff departments, like down in South, stuff like that. I'm sure it really happens. I'm not stupid. I won't stay here and say, hey, it's not happening, because guess what? It's happening and we can see it. That's why we have these incidents. But what I've seen, experienced myself, I didn't see it that much. And the few times that I had issues or concerns, I reported it to our internal affairs. And I was also in certain positions as a lieutenant colonel, as a major, as a captain, that I could call the internal affairs director straight up and make sure that it wouldn't be overlooked.
Absolutely. Man, this conversation is Black Lives. We're talking about lives, people, and I think when do you step outside of your position and your job and really look at a person's life? Like, are they a husband? Are they a father? Are they a mother? Are they a daughter? Are they, where does humanity come into? And we heard some comments earlier about the sense of power when you put on the uniform. You know what I mean? It's not a Superman uniform, which we all know, because if you jump out that window and it's too high, you're not gonna fly. But for a moment in time, it appears that sometimes when blue lives, and I'm not gonna even say that they're all white. You know what I mean? You've heard incidents that all different races can be really just negative and evil, and just put that power thing on once they put the uniform on.
But you know
how
what?
do
Oh, I'm
go ahead,
sorry.
Steve.
Yeah, but
No,
you know
no, go
what?
ahead.
It's so true, because that is a big issue right there. A lot of people, a lot of young kids, I call them kids, 21, 22 nowadays, and they put that uniform on. They think that chest sticks out a little bit more, that badge, they rub that badge. They see for the first time in their life they got a gun on their side. They don't realize the importance and responsibility you have with that gun on your side. And this goes back to, as first line supervisors, the sergeants, the lieutenants, that's where they need to make sure they keep checks on their officers. When they see, hey, when these officers coming right out, and at the beginning, they see stuff where they're maybe being a little over zealous, or very, they're not de-escalating, they're running their mouth because they're wearing that gun and that belt. That's where the gun in their badge. That's where the supervisors need to step up and correct. That's where it goes back to that leadership again. Or if not, these bad apples start. Oh, hey, tell them, hey, get the F off the corner because I told you so. Then it goes up to nobody checks them on that. Then you know what? Next thing you know, hey, maybe they're putting their hands on someone when they don't need to, and then before you know it, oh, all right, hey, nobody's looking around here. You know what? I need to put a case on someone. Oh, you know what? Let me. I found a couple pills earlier. I'm gonna put them pills on them. So it keeps escalating to something worse and worse. And so it goes back to that first line supervision in law enforcement, where them sergeants and them lieutenants or first line supervisors need to make sure they're correcting them right away. If not, it's just going to go out of control, and nothing's going to stop them. We're going to have an incident where they shot someone when they shouldn't have had to use deadly force, or they're putting drugs on the whole entire community. We don't even know the effects of this GTTF stuff, guys, as far as how is it really affected? How many people are really affected? We don't know that, and we probably never will. But we know one thing: it has affected the relationship between the community and the police department for decades to come.
Now we know we have the power people, or the power police, so we say, who have just a power ego trip. But let's step in as the officer. Let me try to step in your shoes. You know what I mean? And there are criminals out there. I mean, that's pure and simple. It is. Everybody don't wake up and say, let's kumbaya today and let's hold hands and let's be nice and walk the neighbors. We got people intimidating seniors. We got people who have decided that their road to success in their family is the shortcut, which is crime. So because we all are people and all our lives, I'm trying to understand how you feel when there's always a threat of danger on the street. You know what I mean? Like, what are you as a person? This has nothing to do with the police. This is me saying a blue life who is a person, right? Who is a human being. What is going through your mind, as you go into some of these communities? 19 years in Baltimore, that's not like Frederick County somewhere. That is That's as urban as it get. If there was any indication from The Wire, I'm sure it is probably 10 times worse than what The Wire portrayed.
Let me let me let
Some
me
neighborhoods.
let me tell you this. Everybody's threat level is different. Mine's a little bit more different. I can count. I kid you not. I can count on one hand. Take away all my search warrants that I participated in. Take away all the search warrants I
Now
participated
these search warrants, once you brought them up, and we know we were dealing with the Breonna case.
Mm-hmm.
Give somebody a search warrant process real quick, and then go into what you're talking.
Okay. Search warrant. What you need is you need probable cause to enter a dwelling, a residence, for you to be able to go in there to knock down the door. Otherwise, now I'm not talking about a no knock. We're not going to talk about no knocks, but just a regular search warrant. You make observations. I'm going to use narcotics. A lot of my career is narcotics. I set up on the location. I can either get probable cause from visual, watching hand-to-hand transactions, seeing people giving money, receiving small items back, suspected narcotics, or I send a informant up there with like $20 to buy 2 dimes. So observations. Once I get that probable cause that I see they're selling from that house, I write an application of a search warrant. Then I go to in front of a judge. I stand in front of the judge, raise my right hand, solemnly swear this is what I saw in my observations. The judge would then go ahead and sign off on it. Then I have like 14 days to execute the warrant. Once I get that, I'll set up by Baltimore City policy. Before you hit a house, you got to set up to make sure before you hit it, you got to do pre-observations and everything else. So once you get that application, you set up, the house is ready to go. You get your raid team. Your raid team is you have a bunker, you have a ram, and then you usually have about 4 or 5 other individuals with you. And then you just go to the house. What you're supposed to do, if it's a no knock, you knock the door. You got to knock loud. I mean, you got to be like, police, police. You can't tap. It's like, please. You got to make sure they're no, they can hear you and everything else. If they don't respond to you after so many seconds, then you hit the door down. You make entry. You're allowed by that search warrant. You're lawfully allowed to enter that premise because you have a signed search warrant in hand. You don't have to wait for them to open that door for you. And that's
well,
pretty
thank
much
you for explaining that. And a lot of people may have never heard that process before. This is Black People versus Blue Lives on the Chicken Box, broadcast by the Afro-American newspaper. We have former Lieutenant Colonel Steve Ward from the Baltimore City Police Department, who has agreed openly to come and just share with us. We're talking about lives. We're talking about, the Black lives versus the Blue lives. And we're also talking about, before I interrupt you, just because I thought the search warrant was important, and how you say a lot of crooked cops, some people may go observe with their eyes, get in front of the court and swear under oath, but be lying about a situation just to get a search warrant. That goes back to supervision, to crooked cop, to other things. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just thought that because with the Breonna case, that we needed to understand where the search warrant comes from. Now we might not agree on the whole process of the system of it or how it works really, but that's what's in place now. So, but I was just stepping back before I interrupted you as a human being, like as men and women who go out and protect and serve and who generally have that in mind. What is it? What kind of emotions are out there? Are you feeling? Like some police officers I know are wondering, are they going to make it home? And that is a lot of mental stress. Not only, we see what the media does, and we get really. I mean, we're up in arms at what happens when an incident happens with a African American, a Black person versus sometimes when an incident happens with a white person. I know I'm going all over the place, but
No.
but Steve, just answer that question first. Then I'll go to the next question.
Now I'm going to tell you. A lot of people would tell you I'm a different person. My fear level is totally different than a lot of people. If I pull my gun out on you, guess what? I'm scared. It's not one of them things, we always like to hear that word. Oh, I was scared for my life, and so I pulled my gun out and shot. Because my thing is, you pull that gun out, you better be ready to use it. That's nothing to play with. I can count on one hand how many times I've actually probably pulled my gun out because I like, wait a minute, my stomach, something in my stomach just didn't feel right. And believe me, I spent a lot of nights by myself. It doesn't matter if I was, like I said, a captain, a major, lieutenant colonel. I didn't have an entourage like some people did when they make rank. They get their little entourage. They got that little 3 or 4 people riding in the car. Me, I drove myself around. That's what I did. I walked the communities. I wanted the people to know who I was. I wanted to introduce myself, that if they wanted to call me, they could call me. I gave everybody my number. So my fear level was totally different. Now, I will tell you an incident that I probably was very scared because that was probably there's been one time in my career where I got in a foot chase with an individual up there at Barclay and 23rd, 24th Street, right after the Freddie Gray incident. It was about 10:30 at night. And I saw he had a gun in his hand. I pulled out my gun. I pointed at him. I told him to drop it. He refused to drop it. I told him to drop it. Again, he didn't do it. He took a shot at me, and the bullet whistled past my right ear. I never shot him. Do you want to know why?
Absolutely.
You want to know why? The reason I didn't shoot him, I said, I can see this now. I'm a white male, and I'm going to put myself all over the news, in the police department, in my family all over the news, saying I shot and killed an African-American male, even though he had a gun and he shot at me. But in back of my mind, because of everything that's going on in the world, that could have cost me my life. And that was the only time I can truly say my whole career that I was really terrified. And luckily, he dropped his weapon, took off running, little foot chase. We got him. We got the gun. No problem at all. But that's a perfect example right there where I did hesitate. But my fear level is a little bit different than everybody else. Everybody got to remember, police officers are human. And there are people, hey, I can't say how they grew up, but their fear level is, sometimes they are scared. If they're in the alley by themselves, even though they got that badge and that gun on them, they're scared. Every time they hit the alley by themselves, they're scared. Every time they get out of the car, when they do a car stop, they're scared. That goes back to that leadership and that training that people, supervision need to see that, pick up on that and correct it before it gets down the road where it could be a very critical mistake where someone could lose their life because of poor training on the officer. And there's no doubt about it. There were some things I do as a commander. I do believe our community need to take up on different training that the police department has, that they can see why police officers do certain things. Like if they come up to your car, hey, sir, ma'am, can you just please keep your hands on your steering wheel for me? That nobody gets hurt, no movements or anything like that, just that they could understand. And at the same time, officers need to be, hey, sir, ma'am, good evening. I pulled you over. You were speeding. You ran the light. You ran the stop sign. For some reason, officers just don't want to say that stuff. I don't know why. Just tell them why. It's all communication. So hopefully I didn't go off too much on with that, sir.
No, this is a chicken box where you speak your truth. This is where we get a chance really to understand. We're just hearing it from a different perspective. That doesn't take away everybody who still feels uneasy about police. You know what I mean? And they, like you said, the friction comes in because you come in uneasy. That's like you come into a room not in a war. Your defense mechanism is on from the beginning. So you're not coming in like you understand the community, Steve. You're one of the, I'm not gonna say the few, but it's probably more of you out there. But what we see on the media is not more of you. We see the guy who is Caucasian who does a heinous crime, and he's he's giving some water. He's getting taken by Burger King, and you're seeing somebody who just didn't want to listen to what a person said, and they got upset, who's getting their brains beat out. You know what I mean? So those are the images that we see. So when we're flooded with that, it already is going to put up our wall. Dr. Draper, jump in. I can feel your camera burning there.
And the other thing that we see is that when we are shot by police, it just seems like they don't get charged, they don't get arrested, they don't get convicted, and so it's a double standard. Grand juries look at evidence and turn their heads, and so I think that the arrest of the officer in the Jonathan Price case is the fastest I've seen a cop arrested for shooting a black person recently anyway. So there's just so many incidences, and that's why I think we're very leery of the process, because the process doesn't favor us because of what we talked about earlier, the structures and systems and policies that are in place that somebody can kill a George Floyd, knee on the neck, kill a Breonna Taylor in our home, and the consequences don't mirror the crime that was committed. And so even in the Freddie Gray case here in Baltimore, that I don't want to debate the merits of that case, but we have these cameras now, and then it does show a little bit more. But I think that the conviction rate is so low for police officers that we, as community, we don't trust that process. We don't trust that judicial process. Kevin, you started to go earlier. I don't know we have time to talk about it. We're almost out of time. But there are bad guys and bad gals on the street. And so, like you said, that's where you started before we went to the warrant piece. There are folk that get up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to rob somebody, kill somebody, do a drug deal today. So that element is there. So I don't want us to, we're not saying that crime is not happening. It's definitely happening.
I see you, Steve. I'm sorry, Dr. Draper. Steve.
What they're talking about with Ms. Draper about that, that's where it goes back, where officers need to know who are their problem individuals on their post. Guess what? Everybody, if you work that area, you should know, guess what? You should know your drug dealers. You should know your people that break into houses, break into cars, that do the street robberies. You know who the violent individuals are. You know that. And so it's kind of one of them things where, when you go out there policing, guess what? We're in Baltimore. Guess what? People hang out on street corners. That's what they do. People hang out. But because they hang out on the street corner, does that mean they're a bad person? No. Guess what? That's just way of life in Baltimore. But you know what? If you are a good street cop, a good community cop, you're going to be getting out of that car every day anyway and say, hey, how you doing, Kevin? How you doing, Ms. Green? How you guys doing today? You already know who your bad guys, who your good guys are. And I'm going to tell you this. I can't tell you how many times being a street cop, how many people used to always text me and call me and say, hey, Steve, hey, these guys are out here robbing people. We need you to come help us. Stuff like that. And so that goes back to, if you're working the community, you better know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. That's just how it is. But guess what? Just because you're a drug dealer, guess what? That don't mean you're a bad guy. Guess what? That's just way of life sometimes in the city. But that means, you'd be very surprised how the people I befriended on the street when I was a street cop, just by knowing people, by just getting out of my car saying, good morning, good afternoon, hello, how are you? And then even helping people out later on in my career, we're getting them training that they could get a job. They might be a drug dealer, and guess what? They might got a history of robbing people, but guess what? They're just trying to put food on the table. And so if you lead them to the right directions, hey, I'm going to send you here where you can get your driver license, your social security card. And then in turn, I'm going to send you this information right here to this officer. He's going to be reaching out to you about getting you job training, that you can get a job, that you're not out on that street corner selling drugs, or you're out on that street corner robbing people. You're actually doing something productive and being a productive citizen in the community. But that's something totally different than what we're talking about right now. We could talk about that on another hand.
Right, absolutely. This is a conversation that could never end, really. I mean, we could have a whole running series daily and probably never end this conversation. Misha Green, my millennial friend, I know you've been sitting back taking all of this in. Do you want to jump in with anything or any question that's burning with you? And if not, we can go to this week's Afro Fact. You're on mute.
Yes. So yeah, I hadn't said anything yet. I knew I was on mute. I was thinking my good question, which I think honestly, so it's so funny because I don't know if it was the lighting or what, but I think I have to say it. Until Steve said, as a white cop, I did not realize this man was a white man.
Yeah, he looks like he's in witness protection, but it's just his lighting. You know, Steve is doing police work. He's not doing stream work, y'all. He's just starting to stream. You know, I'm sure after seeing this, maybe some other people will call Steve. We will send him a ring light. The Afro send him a ring light and get him sexy. Yes, Steve is a one of our white brothers.
I just had to get that out. I'm sure you guys watching were like, why did she make that face? But it was because I was so shocked. But I do want to say thank you, Steve, so much for everything that you do and all the points you made today. You know, I mean, just again, going back to that community piece, the public health piece, and the fact that officers are human. I mean, that's why I know I could not be a police officer, is because there's such really hard decisions that you have to make in a split second, and you're a human making these decisions. And so the training, like you talked about, is key. And, okay, so thank God, my best friend, whose mama is a white woman, just commented and said, "Me too. It's the shadow."
Steve, the big reveal.
Thank you so much. Okay, so at least I'm not crazy. Oh, thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie also says me too.
Okay, this is the wrong Me Too movement, but this is a Me Too movement, Steve. Hey, Steve, you passed. You passed for black. You're invited to the cookout now.
Hey, I appreciate everything. You guys have been great. If there's anything I can do for any of you guys in the future, you guys have my information, contact information. I'll do anything for you guys. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm hoping maybe we can expand it into something else.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll check in with you because, you know, all lives matter, right? It just appears that the Black lives aren't getting the justice that's deserved when these heinous crimes, and these fools who think they have power really don't have power. They're like the guy who all of a sudden gets a varsity jacket and now he thinks he's cool at school. You're still not cool. You know what I'm saying? You're really a fool. Those are my nice words. But all lives matter. And everybody needs to be looked at as a human. And so I know you might have to go, Steve, but we're gonna go 30 seconds and then we'll let Misha do our Afro facts and we'll wrap up, because this is we like to respect the hour, the lunch hour, or breakfast or dinner, depending on what part of the world. This is a worldwide broadcast that you have, and this is a place where hopefully some truth was and some light was shined on. People feel a way, you know what I mean? It could be psychological, and I'm on the box right now. This is my 30 seconds. People feel a way and they make a judgment on a feeling, and they look at and they make their mind up about a situation on an emotion. And a lot of times we say it's emotion over intellect, you know what I mean? And people get emotional and they make a decision in 30 seconds that sometimes they wish they could take back because they snapped at the moment of their emotional feeling instead of taking some people like who really have anger management problems, who have learned how to adjust it. They count. They might start counting backwards from 20 or 10, before they have things that they put in place to de-escalate themselves before they just all of a sudden go off and I'm going to shoot just a random cop just because I don't like any cop, just because what I've seen in the media. So that's me on the box. It's like, don't let your emotions rule your intellect. and don't make up your total mind about a situation before you really get a chance to understand and check all the facts about the situation. And don't be a fly at the debate. Anyway, that's a whole nother that's a whole nother show. Anyway, I just thought about Pence with a fly on his head. I'm sorry. That was just me. Was it just me? No, I know somebody else there was listening too. All right, Dr. Draper, you're on the box. I'm going to let Steve go in the box last.
Okay, you got me distracted with that fly because that fly stayed there for 2 minutes. But anyway, so there are bad cops and good cops, right? And so I've done police ride-alongs, and one thing I would say is that bad or good, indifferent cops are human beings, and when you do a police ride-along, if you do enough of them, then they'll trust you and talk to you, and they have the same problems that we have. But the difference is they also have sworn to protect and to serve. And so I want to go back to something that Steve said. Recruitment is key. Training is absolutely key. Not that somebody can't forget about their training in the heat of a moment, but training is key. So how we train, Steve, I don't know, how other departments are trained, but you said that Baltimore City didn't even start that kind of training that you referred to until 2015. That's when Freddie Gray was killed. And so that means we got a long way to go. That has not been that long ago. And so we've got veteran cops that need to be retrained, and certainly rookies that need to be trained, even going into the academy. And training is key. Leadership is key, because what happens at the top is what trickles down. And somebody put a comment out that this may be going on better in Baltimore, but our results are not better yet. But in Alabama, somebody commented, we still have these problems across the country. And so I just want to, as I get off of the box, say thank you, Steve, for being with us today. Thank you for your service. Let's work together to make our communities better, because if we look at our murder rate here in Baltimore, our shooting rate, it's still way, way, way too high, and citizens are still not feeling that comfortable in many parts of our city. So I'm off the box. Misha, take it from there.
Well, I just have to say that, this conversation has been really informative to me. I have to admit that I have been really hard on police here recently because of the fact that training should have existed far before 2015, for example, in Baltimore. There are still people who are resisting training or doing training and not necessarily, fulfilling, I think, their duties to protect and serve. However, what it also has opened up for me is more of an understanding of the fact that some of this rub comes from the fact that we don't have, enough things in place, which is what I thought about, which is what I said in Open With in general, to really help officers understand the importance of community and to help the community understand that and feel comfortable, not understand, but feel comfortable with the fact that they can go to officers for help and assistance versus handling things in their own ways, which is, again, often why crime is up the way it does. That said, I'm going to use my last few minutes just to quickly do Afro facts, and I really, really, again, appreciate this.
Right, and then we'll let Steve get on the box last, Steve, if you still have time.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so this week's Afro fact is inspired by October 9th, 1940. We hear a lot coming out of the White House today that seems to threaten the rights of people of color. However, in 1940, segregation was still legal, and the government actually supported it and said things about it. So on October 9th of 1940, the White House released a statement that said the government's policy is not to intermingle colored and white enlisted personnel in the same regimental organizations. The U.S. military would remain segregated for 8 more years before Truman desegregated the armed forces in July of 1948. So tomorrow when you wake up, remember this week's Afro fact.
Boom. You be pulling them out the archives on 128 years of archives. You can pull out some Afro facts. If you haven't gotten your membership yet, we have moved to the membership during the pandemic. Go to afro.com. For less than 2 service charges at Uber Eats, you can get all the information. You can get powerful informative education, and a voice that you know and you have trusted to tell you what's really going on in the African American community. Steve Ward is our Caucasian brother from another mother. For you guys who didn't know, the big reveal happened, and you thought, you know, a light skinned brother like myself was just, you know, that was my friend with hair, but he is now my new friend with hair. And you're on the box. I'm going to give you a chance to speak 30 seconds on the box, Steve.
Hey, I just really want the community to know in Baltimore, you have a lot of good men and women that work on that department still, that they care about the community. They care about the people they serve. Just give them a chance to work with them. To the leadership of the Baltimore City Police Department, you have to make that commitment to the community. You have to make sure your officers are trained properly. You got to make sure your officers know the community that they are serving. You got to make sure they can communicate properly. They understand what de-escalation is. And you got to make sure you have something in place for mental health. That is a big key thing in a lot of conflicts that happens between African-American community and law enforcement agencies. And senior leadership, you got to look at bad policies that are in place. If you know it's a bad policy, don't let it show up on one of the major news networks before you say, we got to make a change. Chokeholds are not good. Putting a spit bag over someone's head is not good. So don't let something happen. Take the initiative, make the change. Train, leadership, and partnership with the community. We can see Baltimore flourish again in the future. And again, I just want to say thank you to all. It's been a privilege to be with you guys today. And if there's anything I can do for you or any of your listeners in the future, you can just get up with me and I'll do whatever I can to help out anybody. Thank you again.
Steve, one of the few true friends of the community who really understands his job. You heard him say his cell phone number. I don't know how many people out there know that some officers will give you their number because they can't be everywhere. And we need to keep our eyes and ears, and we need to, you know, can't be so scared that you're not snitching, but yet you can't come out your house because you think something's gonna happen to you. But so sometimes, you know, if you get to know your officers, or officers, if you're listening, man, make some friends. You know, get into the community to help, you know, make our community safer and life more safer on the streets, not only of Baltimore, but all around the world. Everybody's going through different problems, but we're looking to just continue the conversation here at the Afro. So everybody, this has been the Chicken Box, Black People versus Blue Lives. I hope you got a little more understanding about blue, and I hope blue understood a little bit more about black. So now we're black and blue, and we're moving forward instead of behind it. And hey, sometimes you got to break the code, is what we found out, that somebody has to be the trailblazer to break the code of not looking the other way and really checking somebody when the behavior goes against what you signed up to do, which was protect and serve and be a part of the community. I'm Kevin Impeccable Peck. We got representing the Gen X's out there. Dr. Draper representing the boomer / millennials. She can two-step and keep up with the littles. And Misha Green, our DC digital content editor, and also my millennial friend, and Steve Ward tuning in and coming on the Chicken Box. Until next week, have a safe, and think. Use your brain out there, and just remember, people are people. Have a great afternoon, everybody.